Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about breakout players for the 2023 fantasy football season. Now, you may be wondering to yourself, what predictive measures and or variables can we look to in order to determine future success of a fantasy breakout candidate? Again, there are some instances in which variables such as experience, just having more experience under their belt, playing more games, eventually gets a candidate to the next level. There are instances in which injuries and or players leaving the team through free agency and or trade often cause a positional void, which will send more opportunities, whether it is passing attempts, rushing attempts, and or targets towards a fantasy prospect, which will give them more value. Oftentimes, you guys hear me say opportunity leads to success in fantasy football, and that is why on today's episode specifically, the variable I want to focus on in terms of leading to potential breakout candidates in 2023 is coaching changes. When you have a brand new coach, whether it be a head coach and or offensive coordinator that come into a team that have a different scheme in play, it will often lead to opportunities for fantasy prospects within that team based on the scheme alone. Again, there are some offenses that want to throw the ball to their running backs and get them heavily involved, and there are some that just completely avoid it at all costs. So on today's episode, as you guys can see to the right side of the screen, we want to talk about 2023 coaching changes. Now, on the list to the right of me, we have three new head coaches that are offensive play callers. We have Frank Reich, who's joining the Carolina Panthers, of course, Sean Payton joining the Denver Broncos, and Shane Steichen joining the Indianapolis Colts. We additionally have 16 new offensive coordinators this season, which in some instances, some of these guys will be play callers, while others will kind of just take the back seat and let the head coach, who is an offensive play caller, continue to lead the way. A couple of examples in that overall circumstance would be like Matt Nagy. Matt Nagy's the new offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs, of course, with Eric Bieniemy going to the Washington Commanders. But regardless, we know that the Kansas City Chiefs offense is play called by Andy Reid. So there's not really much of a difference there in terms of the offensive coordinator change. There isn't really much of a coaching influence that is being implemented within that team. So we're looking for offenses going into 2023 that have a new offensive scheme and or influence, which will lead to more opportunities within their offense. And of course, a potential breakout season in 2023. Before we get into that, of course, I want to remind you guys, if you have not yet already and you're trying to stay up to date on my latest content, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season with the singular goal of trying to help you win a 2023 fantasy football championship. So do yourself a favor and be sure to subscribe today. Again, our goal this season is 100K subscribers. So if you guys can help us get there, it'd be greatly appreciated. Additionally, for those of you who are trying to gain an even bigger advantage upon your league mates this offseason, be sure to go ahead and check out the link down in the description and get my 2023 fantasy football draft guide. For those of you who travel on over to Underdog Fantasy right now and use code Andrew to sign up and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get a first-time deposit match up to $100, you're going to get my 2023 fantasy football draft guide and rankings. The draft guide contains hundreds of hours of information and data that I've collected this offseason in regards to the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions approaching your draft. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this draft guide also includes my draft rankings, which includes by position, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, of course, the flex position as well, top 200 at that. All rankings will be by tier, and on top of it will be for a half PPR and full PPR scoring format, 4-point per passing touchdown and or 6-point per passing touchdown. These rankings are updated every week throughout the month of August. So regardless of when you do sign up, you'll always get an email every week from me to you personally, which will include the updated rankings. I did send an update yesterday, so be sure to check your spam. This email contains not only the updated draft guide, but additionally an Excel sheet that has all the rankings in it, which is probably easier to utilize during your upcoming drafts. So again, take advantage of the opportunity on hand. Not only will you get all this help during the offseason with the draft guide and rankings, I will also be sending you additional support throughout the entirety of the regular season. Like I've said on multiple occasions, this season, if you go ahead and sign up and make that first time deposit using code Andrew, you're going to get my Sunday morning rankings every single week from weeks 1 through 18. So for week 1 rankings, you'll be prepared to go ahead and figure out who you're playing at your flex position, because my rankings will be there in your email box ready to go. So you don't have to show up on a Sunday morning trying to get your question answered and hoping that I end up, answering that question, especially considering these rankings every Sunday morning will be for all positions by tier, including half and full PPR. So for those of you who are trying to win your 2023 fantasy football championships, be sure to sign up today. Also, for those of you who are wondering whether you're eligible to sign up, the map on the right side of the screen should be able to give you an idea as to whether you're eligible to draft today via Underdog Fantasy and sign up and take advantage of the promotion on hand. Now, for those of you who are not eligible based on your current location, you can check out the link down in the description, which is to my Patreon. That'll include all of the additional content that I've mentioned, so you can go ahead and check that out. But for those of you who are drafting today, be sure to do it responsibly via Underdog Fantasy. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into talking about coaching changes for the 2023 season that will lead to breakout players, beginning with the Denver Broncos offense. And I wanted to talk about, of course, Javonte Williams versus Samaje Perine going into the 2023 year. But before we get into that specific matchup, let's talk about the coaching changes and how Sean Payton and Joe Lombardi influenced this offense at a great margin. Of course, Sean Payton coming out of retirement, the last time we saw him as a head coach and or offensive play caller was in New Orleans. Now, when you go ahead and look at the last, 4 years of his stint with the New Orleans Saints, 2018 through 2021, the New Orleans Saints were the number 3 offense in the National Football League in terms of total offensive touchdowns scored, with 206 throughout that 4-year span. Obviously, they were pretty efficient with Drew Brees, their future Hall of Famer, and of course, a plethora of talented receiving options, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, that were dominating. Now, Alvin Kamara's name is going to be mentioned a lot today because the receiving upside of these two backs on screen is certainly there. And we know that Sean Payton absolutely wants to utilize a running back within this offense who not only has the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield, but also line up out wide in certain circumstances and formations. This being said, from 2018 through 2021, we have seen the New Orleans Saints running backs accumulate the following statistics. They were 12th in rushing attempts, 14th in rushing yards, 7th in rushing touchdowns, 3rd in targets, 4th in receptions, 4th in receiving yards, 5th in receiving touchdowns, and 4th overall in terms of total opportunities being rushing attempts plus targets within that given span of time. Overall, this is elite level opportunity, especially when we talk about the receiving game. The targets and receptions were at a very high level, and that is what continued to give fantasy running backs associated with Sean Payton offenses a lot of fantasy value. Again, you got to remember, Sean Payton has always had a receiving back, whether we go back to Darren Sproles, Pierre Thomas, Reggie Bush, Mark Ingram, and of course, most recently, Alvin Kamara. He's always wanted to utilize running backs in this sense. And of course, Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine additionally have the potential to fill into this role going into this upcoming season. Now, you may be wondering, Andrew, can these two running backs coexist? Absolutely. We have seen Sean Payton offenses, specifically from 2017 through 2020, have two running backs coexist and be of value. 2017, Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara, both these guys top 6 by the end of the season in terms of fantasy points scored at the running back position. The following year, Alvin Kamara was number 4 back, Mark Ingram number 29. Year after that, Mark Ingram was number 29 again. Then we had Alvin Kamara finish as the number 12 overall back. And then now we close out at 2020 as we saw Alvin Kamara finish as the number 1 overall back and Latavius Murray in that offense as the number 33 back. So we have seen on multiple occasions, of course, a Sean Payton offense lead to two running backs finding success, and especially them finding success in the receiving game. Now, the reason this is so important is because, of course, Sean Payton is going to continue to lean in this direction going into 2023. And additionally, his offensive coordinator going into this season, which is Joe Lombardi, a former passing game coordinator when Sean Payton was with the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, when Sean Payton retired, Joe Lombardi moved on to the Los Angeles Chargers, which, of course, I'm going to transition on screen and talk about the Chargers running back statistics over the last 2 seasons. In the last 2 years, the Los Angeles Chargers have been number 7 in terms of total offensive touchdowns scored with 97. Again, very efficient offenses. Joe Lombardi brought in a lot of the influences that he learned from Sean Payton and immediately applied them to the Los Angeles Chargers offense. Even though they weren't getting many rushing attempts, they were still very efficient with them down on the goal line. Of course, 25th in attempts, 23rd in rushing yards, 6th in terms of rushing touchdowns. Of course, like we know, Austin Eckler has been the best running back in fantasy football for the last 2 seasons here, obviously putting up incredible numbers down in the red zone. But specifically in terms of receiving work, number 1 in targets, number 2 in receptions, number 1 in receiving yards, number 2 in receiving touchdowns, and number 11 in opportunity. We have seen Joe Lombardi utilize the running back position at a premium, similar to Sean Payton, who pretty much taught him everything. So going into 2023, this offense is leaned in the direction of, hey, we want to utilize the running back position as much as we possibly can. So let's go ahead and let's bring in guys like Michael Burton at the fullback position, Chris Manhertz, a great run blocking tight end formerly for the Jacksonville Jaguars. You bring in Samaje Perine because you need the running back help. Additionally, you bring in Mike McGlinchey, former right tackle of the San Francisco 49ers, a great overall run blocking tackle. Ben Powers to play offensive guard on the left side. Overall, this team made a huge effort to improve the running game, because that's exactly where they're going to approach. And of course, improve the backfield because of what we are going to talk about with Javonte Williams as we approach the 2023 year. Javonte Williams, of course, has been an efficient back in the National Football League. Back in 2021, his rookie season, despite the fact that he split snaps and touches with Melvin Gordon 50-50, he was the number 17 overall back in fantasy football half PPR, having accumulated 43 receptions on 53 total targets in that given year. In the last 2 seasons, when Javonte Williams has been healthy and given 16 or more touches in a singular game, we have seen him average 14.78 half PPR fantasy points per game. Specifically, there have been 8 instances in which he's been given that level of opportunity within this offense. But the main key news that revolves around Javonte Williams is whether or not he's healthy, because last October 2nd, 2022, Javonte Williams sustained a horrific knee injury. Not only did he tear his ACL, but he also tore his LCL and had additional structural damage that really does not bode well for his potential success in the future. That all being said, he's currently at an ADP of RB26, which makes me wonder, why are so many people bullish on the idea that Javonte Williams is going to kind of defeat the odds of this injury risk and history at the running back position? When we look back to 2015, there have been 13 different running backs that have torn their ACL, and specifically only 2 of those running backs have been able to return the following season from that ACL tear to be top 36 contributors. One being Saquon Barkley, that season was the number 32 overall back, and the other running back being Dalvin Cook, who finished as the number 29 overall back in that season. We did not see much success out of those 2 backs. Inconsistency was them at best throughout those seasons. So I'm beginning to think to myself, is there just a lot of baked in risk with Javonte Williams? Certainly he could be an Alvin Kamara-esque running back within this backfield that not only will be able to get it done on the ground, on the goal line, but through the air. I can see the potential there. And I can without a doubt see why you would want to draft Javonte Williams, assuming he was fully healthy. I understand he's practicing. He is not on the PUP list, which is a great sign. But is he going to be able to defy the odds? Because there's a reason why they brought in Samaje Perine, and I kind of want to influence the conversation in that direction, because Samaje Perine, even though he was offered by the Cincinnati Bengals to go back and be the backup for Joe Mixon, he wanted to go ahead and get away from the team and get a new identity in terms of what kind of contributions he can make towards the team and potentially be a featured guy. And he may have the opportunity of accomplishing that this year because of that knee injury that Javonte Williams sustained. Again, Samaje Perine has been in the league for quite some time now, but he has been a bruiser back that could do everything, whether it's on the ground or through the air. Last season, in the 2 weeks in which Joe Mixon was completely out due to injury, Samaje Perine from weeks 12 and 13 averaged 24 touches per game and 17.9 half PPR fantasy points per game. Last season specifically, in the 4 games in which he was given 10 or more touches, the guy averaged 19.28 fantasy points per game. He has been an efficient receiving and rushing back. Last season, specifically in the receiving game, 51 targets that led to 38 receptions. And if you guys recall, last season, there was a game where Samaje Perine was getting it done and found the end zone multiple times in a game in terms of receptions. So between these 2 running backs, who's the breakout candidate? Is it Javonte Williams with all of that baked in risk? Or is it Samaje Perine who comes in to potentially alleviate Javonte Williams from having to carry a ball a high amount of times? You have to understand, they're going to limit Javonte Williams. They're going to have him on pitch counts probably for the first, couple games of the season, if not for longer, if in fact that knee injury is messing around with him. There are going to be instances in which we see Samaje Perine fully take over this backfield, and there are going to be some games in which Javonte Williams shows up and balls out. That all being said, between the 2, I do believe that based on his current ADP and less injury risk, Samaje Perine is the breakout candidate within this backfield, associated with Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator, and of course, Sean Payton, the head coach and offensive play caller. They brought him in for a reason. They know his capabilities, and they'll absolutely be able to exploit those opportunities and continue to get Samaje Perine more work, whether it's on the ground, through the air, and especially on the goal line, a back that has proven himself in all 3 facets. In my opinion, he's the breakout candidate and the one that I'm going after in my upcoming drafts. All right, let's move on to another player within this offense, because we don't want to go ahead and leave Sean Payton just yet, because both Sean Payton and Joe Lombardi have utilized their tight ends in the past, and we absolutely need to give a little bit more attention to Greg Dulcich and what his potential is for the 2023 season. When we look at 2018 through 2021 in terms of New Orleans Saints tight end stats, this team was number 20 in targets, 20 in receptions, 11 in receiving yards, and 4 in terms of receiving touchdowns. That all being said, when we look at the last 4 seasons when Sean Payton was with the New Orleans Saints, 2018 through 2021, their tight ends on their team averaged about 180 fantasy points per season. Yes, they were spread out amongst a bunch of players, and this includes Taysom Hill getting himself a lot of receiving work throughout that span of time. But this is something we're not going to have to worry about within this Denver Broncos offense here in 2023. Additionally, when I expanded the overall statistics at the tight end position when Sean Payton was with the New Orleans Saints from 2009 to 2021, their tight ends averaged 205 fantasy points per game per season, mainly because of the efforts and contributions of Jimmy Graham throughout the majority of that time, especially in the early 2010s where he was dominating the league at the tight end position. This being said, on the other side of the coin, in terms of Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos, in the last 2 seasons with the Chargers, targeted their tight ends the 6th most times, led the 9th most receptions, 14th most receiving yards, and 12th most receiving touchdowns. Very promising, especially considering we have seen Gerald Everett be the number 15 overall tight end and Jared Cook be the number 17 overall tight end. Of course, one in 2022 and one in 2021 in the last 2 seasons. So we have seen tight end production from these 2 coaches. They're going to get their tight end involved. And like we have heard this offseason, specifically from the mouth of Sean Payton, they want to utilize Greg Dulcich in the Joker role. Within a Sean Payton scheme, the Joker role is a player that will continue to move around the formation and that they, as an offense, want to utilize in terms of mismatches. They want to put a guy like Greg Dulcich on a linebacker and or a safety that he can obviously either run past or use his bigger frame of being 6'4", 250 pounds to catch the ball over. Greg Dulcich is a fast receiving tight end. The guy ran a 4.6 at the NFL Combine. So if in fact we can utilize him down the field, down the seam, he will absolutely cause mismatches, which will lead to his fantasy success. Last season, Greg Dulcich as a rookie, in games when she had 5 or more targets, was averaging 8.82 fantasy points per game. He has been a relevant fantasy tight end when given the opportunity to be such. Last season, obviously, there was a lot of inconsistencies with this offense. Nonetheless, Greg Dulcich, someone that could very easily get into the top 12 tight end conversation based on Sean Payton and, of course, Joe Lombardi's want to utilize the tight end position over the years, and probably once again this year based on how they've talked in interviews and when questioned about the utilization of Greg Dulcich going into 2023. The final player I wanted to mention regarding this offense, of course, all these players are obviously contingent on Russell Wilson playing better, and we know that Russell Wilson will play better this season. This may be another year where he has to learn a new offense, but he will be far more comfortable, and Sean Payton will surround him with pieces and in positions to lead to said success. Now, the most comfortable piece alongside Russell Wilson is Jerry Jeudy. Especially late last season, Jerry Jeudy really did dominate because of his relationship and the rapport that he had built with Russell Wilson over the year. This all being said, Jerry Jeudy, in my opinion, is a breakout candidate in 2023. Even though he did finish as a wide receiver 2 last season, he's still a wide receiver that was drafted ahead of CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman Jr., and Brandon Ayuk. There is still a huge season that we are expecting to see from Jerry Jeudy in his career. He needs to live up to his draft position in comparison to these other guys and how they have developed as wide receivers in the National Football League. But I want to look at, from 2018 through 2021, what has Sean Payton done with his receivers? Well, throughout that span of time, they quite literally only had one relevant receiver all 4 of those seasons, which was Michael Thomas. You can see the stats on screen. Michael Thomas was funnel targeted. Of course, the most recent season of 2019 set the record for most receptions by a wide receiver throughout the regular season with 149 receptions. Incredible numbers, of course, all associated with a guy like Drew Brees, which is a future Hall of Famer. But I think we could still get enough production out of Russell Wilson to justify the idea that Jerry Jeudy can absolutely not only be a wide receiver 2 that has wide receiver 2 upside, and maybe can get himself into a conversation of being a low-end wide receiver 1. You got to remember last season, Jerry Jeudy, weeks 1 through 8, in games in which he played 60% of the snaps or more, again, basically games in which he was healthy and didn't leave the game early, averaged 12.27 fantasy points per game. Later in the season, weeks 13 through 18, when he came back from injury, playing 60% of the offensive snaps in 5 of those games, throughout that span of time, he was averaging 16.68 fantasy points per game. Incredible production. Whenever you gave Jerry Jeudy 6 or more targets last season, regardless of who was at quarterback, the guy was averaging 14.5 fantasy points per game. There is a lot of potential here. And I absolutely believe, based on the fact that there is no more Tim Patrick due to the Achilles injury, Cortland Sutton, I know Marvin Mims, they potentially produce target competition, but is not going to be significant enough in my mind to lead to, Jerry Jeudy being a lesser option. Therefore, he is another one of these breakout candidates associated with this offense due to the new coaching staff taking over within this organization. All right, let's go ahead and let's move on. Let's talk about Anthony Richardson. All right, so the reason why we want to talk about Anthony Richardson is mainly because of the new head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. They moved on from Frank Reich and are going to Shane Steichen, the former offensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles. And the reason why this is so important is because Shane Steichen was able to elevate the play along with Nick Sirianni of Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts was an incredible quarterback in 2021, but the leaps that he took in terms of the passing game in 2022 were incredible. Obviously, you surround him with enough talent with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert, and he's going to make that next step forward, especially behind one of the better offensive lines, if not the best offensive line in the National Football League. But I truly do think that we could get a budget version of Jalen Hurts in the sense of Anthony Richardson going into his rookie season. Now, we all know that Anthony Richardson at Florida didn't have much experience as a starting quarterback, but going into the NFL, he has all the athleticism and physical traits to be able to lead to his fantasy success. He doesn't have to win games in the NFL to be good in fantasy. He doesn't have to have the highest passing completion percentage. He just needs to get his legs moving and he needs to find the end zone. And that is all we practically need for him to do. And he could very easily be a top 12 quarterback by the end of the season. And when we talk about Anthony Richardson and what he did at the combine, his physical traits, this is a guy that set records in terms of broad jump and vertical leap. And not only that, he ran a 4.43 40-yard dash, which is the fourth fastest time at the quarterback position, only behind guys like Robert Griffin and Michael Vick, guys that are, of course, are smaller than him and honestly less athletic. When we're talking about Anthony Richardson, we're looking at a more athletic Cam Newton. Size, speed, strength, all of it is there, but he's just more athletic than Cam Newton. Maybe he's not as polished of a passer, but Cam Newton obviously wasn't the most polished passer either, but he yet was still able to find a lot of value because of his rushing upside. Now, last season, of course, we saw Jalen Hurts run the ball a boatload of times. A lot of designed runs go in his direction, and it was the same in 2021. So the last two seasons of Shane Steichen leading that team as the offensive coordinator got a lot of utilization out of Jalen Hurts running the ball, whether it's down in the red zone or between the 20s. Designed runs were something that they wanted to continue to execute, and they absolutely did. Specifically, in the last two seasons, the rushing yards that Jalen Hurts has accumulated, 49% of them have come from scrambles, while 51% of them have come from designed runs. Again, those are incredible numbers that are obviously going to lead to the potential success of someone like Anthony Richardson, who, if they can get out of the pocket behind a couple lead blockers, absolutely will be able to find himself a lot of yardage on the ground, which for fantasy purposes is great. Now, in terms of passing statistics, of course, in the last two seasons, we have seen the Philadelphia Eagles offense with Shane Steichen be a little bit, more passive, I would say at times. Obviously, we're far more aggressive last season because they have more weapons. I'm leaning towards them probably throwing the ball far less, looking towards, similar numbers to what the Eagles kind of put up in 2021, which again, still can be serviceable for a quarterback that is as young and inexperienced as Anthony Richardson. So this all leads me to believe with Shane Steichen knowing how to run an offense where he's going to run not only zone schemes, a lot of RPOs. The Philadelphia Eagles in 2022 led all teams in the National Football League in terms of RPO passing attempts. They were second in RPO rushing attempts, only behind the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the reason why, of course, I want to bring up the Falcons as well is because the statistics that I anticipate to see Anthony Richardson put forth this upcoming season is going to kind of look like Marcus Mariota last season. Marcus Mariota in 2022, from weeks 1 through 13, was averaging a 61% passing completion percentage, 171 passing yards, 1.15 passing touchdowns per game, 6.5 rushing attempts, 34 rushing yards, 0.3 rushing touchdowns, and 15.12 fantasy points per game. Now, those numbers may not look like the best overall, but in terms of total fantasy points scored from weeks 1 through 13 prior to Marcus Mariota's season-ending injury, he was still the number 12 quarterback throughout that span of time. There is a lot of potential for Anthony Richardson to completely blow past his current ADP and be an incredible fantasy value because of the rushing upside. Many people may look at him and think, hey, Andrew, why aren't we going to see just another Justin Fields where he's going to struggle heavily in the passing game and that's going to hurt his value? You got to remember, even though Justin Fields has had stints of time where he struggled, you even go back to Justin Fields' rookie season. Weeks 3 through 7 as a starting quarterback only averaged 6.89 fantasy points per game. But later on in the season, weeks 8 through 15, when he finally got a hang of it, Weeks 8 through 15 in the 4 games where he played in his rookie season 2021, averaged 19.68 fantasy points per game. There is value to be had with Anthony Richardson, someone that if you don't want to go ahead and grab an earlier quarterback, you can grab more depth at alternate positions and go ahead and invest in him, because not only does he have the offensive coordinator, not only does he have the run game, he has a top 10 offensive line, similar like we talked about yesterday. In fact, they're number 7 in terms of run blocking grades going into 2023. Their continuity is fully there within this upcoming season in terms of their offensive line. And they have weapons. They have Michael Pittman Jr., they have Alec Pierce, they have Jelani Woods. If Jonathan Taylor is going to play, it's going to make it that much easier, and that is why I think Anthony Richardson is absolutely a breakout candidate in 2023. Let's move on to the last team I wanted to talk about. Frank Wright leads the Carolina Panthers this upcoming season, and Miles Sanders, without a doubt, is someone that you have to be looking at as a potential breakout candidate. I know that last season he finished as the number 13 overall back in terms of fantasy points scored and number 16 in terms of fantasy points per game on average, having an incredible season of over 1,200 rushing yards, 260 rushing attempts, and 11 rushing touchdowns. Great numbers across the board. But I truly do believe that within the Carolina Panthers offense, if they utilize him as we anticipate, we could see Miles Sanders even be better than he was last season. Now, specifically, when we talk about Frank Wright from 2018 through 2021 as the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, what kind of influences did he have on the offense? The reason why I specifically exclude 2022 is because he wasn't the coach for half of that season because he got fired and obviously replaced with Jeff Saturday. That being said, 2018 through 2021, the Indianapolis Colts were number 9 amongst all teams in terms of total offensive touchdowns scored. Within 4 seasons, 184 scored. Pretty good overall stats. Now, in terms of running back statistics throughout that span of time, they were 2nd in attempts, 3rd in yards, 2nd in rushing touchdowns, 8th in targets, 9th in receptions, and 10th in receiving yards, 18th in receiving touchdowns, and number 2 overall in terms of total opportunities. Incredible statistics across the board, because again, we know that Frank Wright wants to get his running backs involved within this offense. Additionally, when you go ahead and look at the coaching staff of the Carolina Panthers going into 2023, their assistant head coach / running backs coach is Deuce Staley. Deuce Staley was a running backs coach with the Philadelphia Eagles from 2013 through 2020. 2 of those seasons in which, of course, Miles Sanders was a starting running back. Throughout those 2 seasons, 2019 through 2020, they targeted their running backs the 3rd most times amongst all teams in the National Football League, which led to, of course, Miles Sanders having himself 63 targets in one of those seasons and 52 in the other. Obviously, incredible opportunity, especially in comparison to what we saw Miles Sanders exposed to within the Philadelphia Eagles offense after Deuce Staley's departure, and of course, their scheme changed to having a mobile quarterback, which obviously led to far less, potential passing attempts for the running backs. That being said, Deuce Staley continued on his career in 2021 through 2022 with the Detroit Lions. Within that offense, they targeted their running backs the 4th most times. We know that this team is going to get their running backs a lot of opportunities. It is demonstrated on screen based on those given years with those coaching staffs. And Miles Sanders, he was paid a lot of money this offseason. He got the biggest free agent running back contract, a 4-year, $25 million deal. Of course, we know a lot of running backs have been complaining about not getting money, but Miles Sanders settled and he found himself a 3-back role. We know that, of course, Frank Wright has come out and said in interviews that we expect Miles Sanders to be a 3-down back. He can do a little bit of everything, and that's exactly what he'll do. Whether it's on the ground, through the air, or even as a pass blocker, he can absolutely be an efficient option, especially considering we have a rookie quarterback. With Bryce Young at quarterback, we're going to probably see him with his smaller frame not run the ball out of the pocket and not get himself in dangerous scenarios. He'll dump it off to Miles Sanders. I mean, last season, Jahmyr Gibbs in 2022 at Alabama had 56 targets for a reason from the direction of someone like Bryce Young. So if we're going to see more and more opportunity for these running backs, of course, we'll see more fantasy points. Last season in specific, Miles Sanders, 15 plus opportunities, averaged 16.06 fantasy points per game. Since 2019, anytime Miles Sanders has been given 15 or more opportunities, averaging 14.89 fantasy points per game. And I understand that Miles Sanders, since his rookie year 2019, has averaged 5.02 yards per carry on average behind one of the most elite offensive lines in the National Football League. But don't let the offensive line for the Carolina Panthers trick you. They have 5 returning starters. They have proven last season from week 7 through 18 to be valuable offensive linemen that can absolutely dominate in the running game. Throughout that span of time without Christian McCaffrey in the lineup, of course, we saw this team run the ball 28.36 times per game that led to 130 rushing yards per game, 0.91 rushing touchdowns per game, and the running backs accumulating nearly 23 fantasy points per game. So there is a lot of value to be had behind this offensive line. And of course, with the coaching changes, Miles Sanders, an incredible value. Now, the only other player that I wanted to mention is another tight end. It is Hayden Hurst. Besides Frank Wright coming in, and of course, his influence in terms of utilized in tight end position, again, since 2018 has targeted his tight ends the 5th most times, that have led to an incredible slew of statistics, to say the very least. Whether it has been Eric Ebron, Mo Ali Cox, Jack Doyle, it doesn't matter. Frank Wright has gotten his tight ends utilized every single season, and there's a reason why they went out and signed Hayden Hurst. They brought him over from the Cincinnati Bengals because they can use him in a lot of 11 personnel sets. Now, the reason why I mentioned that scheme formation specifically is because the offensive coordinator of the Carolina Panthers going into this season is Thomas Brown. He was the former assistant head coach and tight ends coach of the Los Angeles Rams last season. We know that the Los Angeles Rams targeted their tight ends 121 times last season. Of course, Tyler Higbee finishing as a top 12 fantasy prospect. So if in fact we're going to see the overall utilization of the tight end position within this offense continue to rise, and of course we have witnessed, regardless of who's been at quarterback with Frank Wright's offense, continue to target in the direction of their tight ends. Again, I know Frank Wright has had guys like Andrew Luck, Jacoby Brissett, Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz over the last couple of years, but I think Bryce Young could be a little bit of a safer option and continue to look in the direction of this tight end position, which will give him value. Hayden Hurst from 2020 through 2022, anytime he's been given 5 or more targets, averages 8.44 fantasy points per game. Anytime he's given 4 or more receptions in a game, 8.71 fantasy points per game. Let's not forget back in 2020 with the Atlanta Falcons, when there was no Kyle Pitts there and Matt Ryan was the starting quarterback, we saw Hayden Hurst finish as the number 10 overall tight end in half PPR scoring format. We know he could have value and he could be a breakout candidate going into this upcoming season. That's going to cover it for me today. Thank you everybody for watching. These are some breakout players going into the 2023 year based on coaching changes that can influence their overall opportunities and of course lead to success in 2023. Before we end out here, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're trying to stay up to date on my latest content. Again, we're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season with the singular goal of trying to help you win a 2023 fantasy football championship. Also, don't forget to go ahead and travel down to the description of the video and use code Andrew to sign up via Underdog today. Make that first time deposit so you can get not only that first time deposit match, so you can go ahead and start drafting today, but you can also get my 2023 fantasy football draft guide, the rankings associated with it. Again, for those of you who have already gone ahead and signed up, be sure to check your email, your spam, because I've already sent the updated draft guide and an Excel sheet with those rankings on it so that you're up to date, ready to go. Additionally, you'll get my rankings from weeks 1 through 18. So every single individual week, based on matchups, based on everything, I'll have my rankings by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, in order to help you win. So help me help you. Do yourself a favor and check that out today. Outside of that, thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.